Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, the channel where we talk all things BYU, Big 12, and of course, realignment. And today we're taking a look at the latest from Ross Dellenger, talking about the Big 12 and UConn in negotiations to add them as the newest member to the conference, which I think is wild because I thought that this had been put on the back burner. It seemed like Brett Yormark, while he was hot and heavy on it, the school presidents had kind of put the kibosh on that, at least for now. And with all the potential realignment scenarios that could happen, depending on how things go in the ACC with the lawsuits with Florida State and Clemson, it felt like everybody's in a holding pattern. Wait and see what happens there, because who knows what'll happen and what kind of opportunities could open up. So it seems very interesting that this would be going on now. But let's go ahead and take a look at what the article says about it. It says the Big 12 and UConn remain in serious negotiations about the Huskies joining the league as its newest expansion member, in a marriage that could bring together arguably the country's strongest basketball conference. Should have omitted the word arguably there. And perhaps the nation's best hoops program. UConn officials visited with Big 12 athletic administrators in Dallas last week. Though nothing is imminent, the in-person presentation is a sign of the serious nature of the discussions. Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark is set to make a similar presentation to the league's presidents next week. In the latest version of the deal, UConn could join the conference as a member in all sports except football, starting at latest in 2026, contingent upon the school meeting certain investment thresholds in the sport. UConn football would join the Big 12 in 2031. And while the Huskies are not expected to receive a full distribution share from the league, the move would increase their financial situation and pair the school's elite basketball program with a power conference brand, which I think is interesting because I feel like the Big East is already considered a power conference in terms of basketball, but more on that. The Big 12 and UConn is an unusual geographic match. Yes, we're well aware they're far apart. It does get the Big 12 into the Northeast, but which is not as strong with college football, but definitely in terms of basketball. So it expands the conference's footprint that way. Let's see. I think the key part of this, though, it says it sets up an ideal home for the Huskies as college athletics launches into a new revenue sharing world with athletes. And so that's where it seems that seems to be the key piece of this that I'll get into in a moment. But it's really about how the college athletics landscape is shifting. Football will have to wait while it did advance to a bowl game 2 years ago. Football, okay. Let's move on. It says a football move is imperative for the school as the last remaining independent football program in the country. Excluding outlier Notre Dame, UConn receives the smallest portion revenue from the college football playoff. So I don't see how this move really makes sense for UConn without including football, because that's the program that's stranded. That's the football that has the potential to generate the most revenue, and that's the one that is floundering right now and kind of off in no man's land. They must see this as a way to get their foot in the door, because we know how well it went in the AAC when they were there, that a lot of fans lost interest. You saw the program begin to tank because they didn't have those traditional rivalries. And they're happy being back in the Big East, even if that means football is not as good. But I feel like, yes, they'd be at a power level, and so the football would be more interesting opponents, but it's still, you're lacking that those geographic rivalries. And so I think this is all about getting their football in a power conference, because, again, I feel like the Big East is a power conference, and they've continued to have success there. The other thing, as I alluded to earlier, is the revenue sharing. So they must feel like it's essential to get that revenue sharing in order to stay competitive, to stay at the elite level they're at in terms of basketball, both men's and women's. And so I feel like that has got to be a big portion of this as well. From the Big 12 perspective, I think this must be, because I'm not a big fan of having some football members and non-football members. I mean, the Big East was kind of a mess. We saw what eventually happened there. Not saying that was the cause, but it always felt like an interesting kind of hodgepodge match. It's worked for Hawaii and the Mountain West and their situation, but they're kind of an outlier. Could work with UConn, but where I think this is interesting is because we've all heard about the Big 12 being interested in potentially decoupling their TV deals for football and basketball and feeling like they'd be able to maximize and get more revenue out of them. And so, if that's the case, then this does make sense because UConn clearly does bring a lot of value in the basketball, in basketball, and so I think that must, in my mind, because I don't see what other advantage Big 12 would have for acting now for bringing UConn in. Obviously, UConn is desperate in terms of their football and realizing that the lifeboats into a power conference are quickly disappearing. And this is a way to get in and potentially rescue their football program down the road. The Big 12, you bring in another basketball powerhouse now with the potential of a football program that expands your footprint into the Northeast down the road. So again, I still feel like this feels a little rushed. Let me know what you think about the potential addition of UConn to the Big 12. Does it make sense? Should they wait? Or do you like it since football isn't guaranteed? Let me know that in the comments. Please be sure to like the video and subscribe. And as always, go Cougs.